Most people kill their flower bed before it even has a chance because they plant everything the same day in the same soil with zero plan. I did the opposite. I spent an entire day building one single flower bed with 13 different sun-loving species, and by the end, it looked like something out of a resort, not a front yard. What you're about to see is the exact layout, the exact soil trick, and the exact plant order that made this bed explode with color in weeks instead of months. In this video, I'm walking you through 15 things I learned building the biggest flower bed of my life. We're going deep into soil prep, spacing, plant choice, and the tiny mistakes that ruin a bed before it even starts. Number 9 is the one most people get backwards, and it's probably wrecking your flower bed right now without you even knowing it. Subscribe now, because next week I'm showing the exact maintenance schedule that keeps a bed like this alive through every season, and you don't want to miss it. Item 1. Start with the edge, not the plants. Everyone wants to jump straight to plants, but the real foundation of a flower bed this size is the border. I used long wooden beams stained a deep reddish brown to frame the whole thing, and that single choice changed everything about how the bed reads visually. A clean, strong edge tells your eye exactly where the garden begins and where the lawn ends. Without that edge, even gorgeous plants look messy and unplanned. The border also does something practical. It holds your soil blend in place so it doesn't wash out onto the grass every time it rains. I went with wood here, but stone, brick, or even metal edging works the same way as long as it's solid and level. Here's the part most people skip. The height of your edge should match the scale of your bed. A tiny 6-inch border on a bed this long would look completely wrong. Mine sits tall enough to feel intentional, almost like a raised planter built right into the ground. A lot of people don't realize the border isn't decoration, it's structural. It stops erosion, controls water flow, and keeps mulch from migrating everywhere. So the edge was locked in, but the soil underneath still needed serious work. And what I did next is the reason nothing in this bed struggled. Item 2. The soil layering trick nobody talks about. I didn't just dump one bag of soil and call it done. I layered it like lasagna, starting with a coarser base for drainage, then a middle layer of nutrient-rich compost, then a finer top layer for planting. This matters more with a bed this size because 13 different species all want slightly different drainage conditions. The bottom layer keeps water from pooling around roots, which is the #1 silent killer of new plantings. The middle layer feeds everything slowly over the following months. Top layer is what actually touches your root balls when you plant, so it needs to be soft and workable, not compacted straight from the bag. Most people don't know that compacted soil right out of the bag can actually suffocate roots, even though it looks fine on the surface. I broke every clump apart by hand before laying the top layer down. Get the soil wrong, and every single plant on this list will underperform, no matter how healthy it looked at the nursery. Next, we need to talk about the plant that anchors the entire design. Item 3. The palm tree that sets the whole tone. At the very start of the bed, I placed a tall Areca-style palm, and this one decision set the tropical direction for everything else. A palm this size acts as a vertical anchor. It draws the eye up and gives the whole bed a sense of height, instead of everything sitting flat at ground level. Palms like this need full sun and soil that drains fast, which is exactly why the layering from the last section matters so much. I positioned it close to the wall so it gets reflected heat off the stucco, which palms actually love, especially in cooler months. Most beginners plant their tallest specimen dead center, which actually unbalances a long bed. Placing it at one end creates a natural sightline that pulls your eye down the entire length of the garden. A detail almost nobody mentions is that palms planted too close to a foundation can eventually cause root pressure issues, so I left enough clearance for years of growth. Quick question for you before we keep going. Do you have a spot in your yard right now that's just empty dirt or patchy grass because you're not sure what would actually survive there? Type it in the comments. I genuinely read every single one, and I'll tell you what I'd plant there. And if you're planning any kind of bed this season, subscribe now because these full builds get buried by the algorithm fast, and you don't want to miss the follow-up video where I show how this exact bed looks 3 months later. Item 4. Why I used a fern right at ground level. Right beneath the palm, I tucked in a soft, feathery fern. And this was intentional layering, not random filler. Ferns fill that awkward gap between the tall palm trunk and the ground, and they soften what would otherwise be a hard, bare stretch of soil. This particular fern handles partial shade from the palm's canopy, but still gets enough ambient light from the open side of the bed to stay full and green. That's the trick with texture planting. You're not just picking pretty plants, you're picking plants that solve a specific visual or functional problem. The surprising fact here is that ferns planted at the base of polar specimens actually help retain soil moisture for both plants by shading the ground and slowing evaporation. Right next to that softness, I wanted something with the total opposite energy, and that's where the real color drama starts. Item 5. The deep red foliage plant that steals attention. Next in line is a cordyline with dramatic, deep burgundy red, spiky foliage, and honestly, this plant does more visual work than almost anything else in the bed. Against all that green surrounding it, the red practically glows, especially in afternoon light. Cordylines love full sun and actually get deeper, richer color the more direct light they receive, which is the opposite of what a lot of people assume about dark-colored foliage. Plant it in shade, and that rich burgundy fades toward dull green fast. Most people don't realize that foliage color plants like this one are doing the job flowers usually do without ever needing a single bloom. That's huge for a low-maintenance bed because you get color 365 days a year, not just during a bloom window. That burst of red needed something structured right after it to keep the eye moving, and that's where the ornamental grass comes in. Item 6. Ornamental ferns and grass working as a team. I layered in another feathery textured plant right after the cordyline, creating a rhythm of soft, hard, soft as you move down the bed. This isn't random. It's a design principle professional landscapers use constantly called repetition with variation. The soft mounding shape here acts almost like a cushion between the spiky, dramatic plants around it. Without it, the transition from one bold plant to the next would feel jarring and disconnected instead of flowing naturally. All right. Pause with me for a second. Be honest with yourself right now. Does your yard have any repetition in it at all, or every plant just kind of randomly placed wherever there was space? That single shift of thinking in patterns instead of individual plants is what separates an okay yard from one that actually stops people walking by. If that idea just clicked for you, smash the subscribe button because the next video breaks down 5 more design patterns like this one that cost nothing extra to use. The surprising fact most people miss is that grouping textures in repeating patterns actually makes a garden look bigger than it is because your eye reads rhythm as depth. With that rhythm established, it was time to bring in something with serious architectural presence. Item 7. The Croton. The plant that looks fake but isn't. The Croton in this bed has these wild yellow, orange, and green splashed leaves that genuinely make people stop and touch them because they assume it's artificial. It's 100% real, and it thrives in exactly the kind of full sun heat this bed sits in. Crotons are notorious for dropping leaves when they're stressed by cold or inconsistent watering, so placing it against a warm, sun-facing wall like this one gives it the stable conditions it actually needs to hold on to that insane color. Here's what almost nobody tells you. Crotons change color intensity based on how much direct sun they get, so the exact same plant can look completely different depending on where in your yard you place it. Right after that explosion of color, I needed a plant that could calm things down again, and this next one does it in the most unexpected way. Item 8. The agave that adds structure and danger. Dead center in the bed sits a variegated agave, with those thick, sculptural blue-green and cream-striped leaves fanning out in every direction. Agaves are basically the opposite of everything else in this bed. Slow-growing, structural, and almost architectural rather than soft and leafy. This plant needs the least water and the least fuss of anything here, which makes it perfect for the center of a bed where irrigation can be inconsistent. It's essentially drought insurance sitting right in the middle of your design. The fact most people don't know is that agave spines can be surprisingly sharp, so placement matters a lot if you have kids or pets who might brush past it. Right beside that dramatic sculptural shape, I wanted height again, which brings us to the vertical evergreens. Item 9. The backwards mistake almost everyone makes with evergreens. I planted narrow, upright junipers spaced along the back portion of the bed, And here's the part that fixes a mistake almost everyone makes. Most people plant tall, narrow evergreens like these too close together, thinking it'll fill in faster. And instead, they end up fighting each other for light and airflow within a year or two. I spaced mine with enough room for their mature width, not their current nursery pot width. That one decision is the difference between a bed that looks incredible for 5 years versus one that needs replanting in 18 months. These upright evergreens also do something subtle. They break up the horizontal line of the bed, so your eye doesn't just skim across it flatly, it bounces up and down, following each spike of green. Right in front of those evergreens is where the real showstopper of the entire bed lives. Item 10. The hanging basket that makes the whole wall come alive. Mounted on the wall above the bed is a hanging basket absolutely overflowing with bright red geraniums. And this single element does more for the overall look than almost any ground-level plant. Pulls your eye upward off the flower bed and onto the wall, connecting the whole space vertically instead of just horizontally. Geraniums in a hanging position actually perform better than in ground because the drainage is instant. There's zero risk of root rot from sitting water. They also get even sun exposure from all sides, which keeps blooming consistent around the entire basket, instead of just on one sunny side. The detail most people miss is that a single hanging basket like this can visually double the perceived color of an entire bed, because it's positioned at eye level where people actually look first. Right below all that red is where the smaller flowering plants come in to finish the color story at ground level. Item 11. Small blooms doing the detail work. Tucked near the front edge are clusters of small pink and purple flowering plants, and their job is completely different from everything else in the bed. Where the bigger foliage plants provide structure and color blocks, these small blooms provide fine detail and softness right at the edge where people walk closest. These smaller flowering varieties are typically fast bloomers, meaning they fill in gaps quickly, while the slower-growing structural plants like the junipers and palm are still establishing themselves. That's a technique professional landscapers use constantly, called filler planting. The surprising fact here is that these fast-blooming fillers are often temporary by design, meant to be swapped seasonally, while the bones of the garden, the palm, the evergreens, the agave, stay permanent year after year. After all that softness at the front, I closed the bed out with something completely different in shape and texture. Item 12. The perfectly rounded shrub that balances everything. At the far end of the bed sits a perfectly rounded boxwood-style shrub, and geometrically, this is doing something really important. Every other plant in this bed has some kind of spike, fan, or irregular natural shape. This one sphere brings a clean, geometric contrast that makes the entire bed feel intentional instead of wild. Rounded shrubs like this one are typically slow-growing, which means that perfect ball shape holds for a long time with minimal trimming. It's one of the lowest maintenance plants in the entire bed, despite looking the most manicured. Most people don't realize a single geometric shape like this placed at the end of a long bed acts as a visual full stop. It tells your eye the composition is complete. With the shape locked in, there was still one more layer working underneath everything. You can actually see. Item 13. The mulch layer that ties every plant together. Across the entire surface of the bed, I spread a dark, rich mulch, and this step gets skipped constantly by beginners because it feels like the boring finishing touch. It's actually doing several jobs at once, locking in soil moisture, blocking weed growth, and giving every single plant a unified dark background that makes their colors pop even harder. Mulch also regulates soil temperature, which matters a lot for plants like the Croton and cordyline that are sensitive to temperature swings around their root zone. A 2 to 3 inch layer is usually the sweet spot, enough to block light from weed seeds without smothering the plants themselves. The fact almost nobody considers is that mulch color actually changes how vibrant your flowers look next to it. Darker mulch makes bright reds and pinks pop dramatically more than lighter colored mulch does. At this point, every individual plant was in place, but two things still tied the whole thing together. Item 14. Spacing for growth, not for instant perfection. Every single plant in this bed was placed with mature size in mind, not how full the bed looked on day one. This is genuinely the hardest discipline in gardening because a freshly planted bed always looks a little sparse, and the temptation to cram more plants in is enormous. I left real gaps between species, knowing that within a few months, the ferns would fill out, the grasses would spread, and the whole bed would knit together naturally. Planting too tight is one of the most common reasons beds look incredible for one season and then become an overcrowded mess the next. The detail most people never think about is that overcrowded plants don't just look messy. They actively compete for water and nutrients, which weakens every single plant in the bed simultaneously. And that patience through the early stage is really what led to the very last insight tying this entire project together. Item 15. Why this bed actually works as one system. The real secret to why this flower bed looks as good as it does isn't any single plant on this list. It's that every plant was chosen to play a specific role. Tall structural anchors like the palm and evergreens, color and drama plants like the cordyline and croton, soft filler plants like the ferns and small blooms, and geometric contrast from the boxwood, all working together instead of competing. Most home gardeners buy plants one at a time based on what looks pretty at the nursery that day. That's exactly why so many beds end up feeling random and disconnected no matter how much money gets spent on them. The surprising truth is that a flower bed this size actually needed less maintenance than a smaller randomly planted bed would, because every plant was matched to the same sun exposure and drainage conditions from the very start. Looking back at everything from the border to the soil layering to the palm anchoring the whole design down to that final layer of mulch, the real pattern running through this entire flower bed is intention. Every single decision from item 1 to item 15 was made before a single plant went into the ground, not after. That's the actual difference between a garden that thrives for years and one that struggles from week 1. It was never really about having 13 species. It was about having a plan those 13 species could actually succeed inside of. If this gave you a completely new way of looking at your own yard, next week I'm coming back with the 3-month update on this exact bed, showing what filled in, what struggled, and what I'd genuinely do differently if I started over. Subscribe now so you don't miss that follow-up, because seeing how a bed like this actually performs over time is honestly more valuable than the build itself. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next one.